Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us this morning. With no further ado, we'll go right into the U.S. Ambassador, Ms. Sarah Ann Lynch.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I hope that you've all been staying healthy during this global pandemic, and thank you so very much for joining me here today remotely so we continue to stay safe and sound. We received a lot of questions yesterday about the Secretary of State's statement on visa restrictions. So this morning, I'm going to amplify some of his comments for you, and I should have time at the end for a few questions. As you know all too well, it has been more than 19 weeks since the general and regional elections took place in Guyana. There has yet to be a resolution, despite a full election recount and a ruling by Guyana's apex court, the Caribbean Court of Justice, that the national vote recount should be used to declare the winner. There have been 7 separate election results, 5 prepared without witnesses, and by witnesses, I mean international and local observers, party agents, and elections officials. 2 of those results were prepared with substantial observation. Both local and international observers stated that GCOM ran an election day that was free, fair, and credible. The same was said about the recount, with CARICOM observers called the most credible interlocutors, stating that nothing precluded GCOM from declaring a winner using the national vote recount. The Guyanese people have exercised their civic right, and they deserve to be heard. But due to continued electoral improprieties, the people have not been heard after 19 long weeks. As such, the Secretary of State announced visa restrictions on individuals that have been responsible for or complicit in undermining democracy in Guyana. Immediate family members of such persons may also be subject to these restrictions. These restrictions are under the authority of the Immigration and Nationality Act, Section 212A3C, to restrict visas to those whose entry into the United States would have potentially serious adverse foreign policy consequences. Visa records are confidential under U.S. law, so we are not able to identify the individuals or provide details on any individual visa case. The international community has been clear that it stands with the Guyanese people and that there would be consequences for individuals who seek to undermine democracy. Over 130 countries are represented through various statements from the Organization of American States, the OAS, the Commonwealth, CARICOM, the European Union, as well as multiple bilateral messages and calls for the process to be free and fair. The events following the March 2 elections, some of which I personally witnessed, indicate that there are forces that have repeatedly refused to accept the will of the people at the ballot box. Guyana's non-democratic trajectory is dangerous for its citizens and for the hemisphere as a whole. I hope that Guyana's leaders understand what is at stake if it continues down this path. The Secretary's action yesterday sends a clear message of the consequences of subverting democracy and the rule of law, which pose a danger to us and our hemispheric partners. As a signatory to the Inter-American Democratic Charter and a member of the OAS, Guyana has always been committed to democracy, and we hope it will remain that way. The U.S. has long said that we have no preference for a winning party, as long as that party is selected through a free and fair electoral process that is transparent. As Friends of Guyana, the United States reiterates our call that all Guyanese individuals in leadership positions respect the Guyanese electoral process and respect the will of the people. And we thank the people of Guyana for their continued patience during this extraordinarily long electoral process. And before I get to your questions, I would like to say something about Chairwoman Justice Retired Claudette Singh. I am shocked and appalled at the dangerous statements and actions that I have seen directed at the Chairwoman. Chairwoman Singh is a person of the utmost integrity and a distinguished jurist who has given decades of her life in service to her country. I hope that all Guyanese will speak out on her behalf and allow her to continue her work and bring this electoral process to closure. And with that, I'd be happy to take a few of your questions. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so we are able to take some questions. The first one is from Guyana Times. If the Granger regime continues to stonewall, will sanctions be escalated? And would the next stage of sanctions be after visa restrictions?
I really can't comment on any further action. The Secretary was very clear yesterday that visa restrictions are the step that he finds important right now, as it is clear that democracy has been undermined by certain individuals. Further action will be determined by the highest levels of the U.S. government.
Are there any other questions from the press? Please.
Yeah, this is Neil. Sorry.
Yeah, okay. Please put your name and your outlet in the press, in the chat space, but go ahead, Neil.
Yes, I did. I was wondering, Ambassador, could you tell us how many persons are affected by the visa restrictions? And if you could say what categories of officials we're looking at?
Good to see you, Neil. No, per U.S. law, we are not able to talk about the individuals. So we're not able to name names, and I'm not going to get into numbers. We reserve the right to review any actions that are occurring in Guyana at this time, and we will review various cases and actions and make determinations as necessary going forward.
Dr. Chabral, News Talk Radio, Demerara Waves. Recently, the Prime Minister of Guyana, Mr. Nadamutu, was on record as saying that the Granger administration is being targeted because the United States wants to use Guyana to remove the Maduro government. Is this all part of your strategy?
Good to see you as well. We are friends of Guyana. As you know, we've been providing assistance here for years. We've had great cooperation with Guyana on many common objectives that we have in the hemisphere. Our objective here is singular. It is to make sure that democratic principles are adhered to, as well as the rule of law.
So this has nothing to do with targeting the Maduro government through Guyana.
We're focused on Guyana. It has nothing to do with any other nation. And I will add that we are not alone in our conclusions here. Over 130 nations, as I mentioned, through comments and statements from the OAS, the Commonwealth, the European Union, the Caribbean members of CARICOM, as well as bilateral statements from the Western Hemisphere, from Europe, from Africa, from Asia, have all come to the same conclusion, that this national vote recount is the count that needs to be used in order to make sure that the will of the Guyanese people stands.
Okay, folks, I do want to go in order because I do want to respect folks who put their questions in. Marcel Thomas from Starbuck News. Does the United States recognize that Irfan Ali is the president-elect and has won the March 2 general elections?
We will wait for a declaration from the chairwoman of GCOM.
Kemal King from Kaitor News. What are the escalating sanctions from the U.S. if the government refuses to step aside?
I cannot comment on anything other than what the Secretary of State mentioned yesterday, which are an initial tranche of visa restrictions.
Okay, Gordon Mosley, did you want to speak for yourself, sir?
Hi, good morning, Ambassador.
Morning.
Two quick questions. One, could you indicate if these visa restrictions have taken effect? And could you say whether the persons affected have so been informed? And secondly, ma'am, is it a coincidence that the announcement of these restrictions is coming at a time when there's another court hearing? Or is that a subtle attempt to influence the local courts?
Okay, starting with your first questions, the visa restrictions took place immediately. Your second question, people will be informed when they apply for a visa, or if they already have one and they plan to travel to the US. They will be informed that their visa has been revoked. In terms of the timing of this, the Secretary of State has been for several weeks talking about the serious consequences that would be undertaken by the United States should democracy continue to be undermined here. And so there is nothing coincidental about the date by which he made this statement. Thank you.
Adam Harris? How many restrictions have you implemented, and when did you begin the restrictions?
I'm not going to get into the numbers, but as I said previously, they did take place immediately. And if necessary, we will look at further visa restrictions. And these are all targeted, keep in mind, on individuals who have been identified as undermining democracy. Targeted visa restrictions.
Lisa Hamilton from the Guyana Chronicle, did you want to speak? Are these conditions under which these visa restrictions can be removed? If yes, what are these?
The Secretary of State is the person that has the authority to remove these visa restrictions if he determines that there are no longer any adverse impacts on U.S. foreign policy.
Julia Johnson, did you want to speak? Would you say the actions of your government is premature given that a court matter, one of several since March 2nd on elections, is yet to be determined?
Secretary of State has been speaking out on this issue again for several weeks. And he is not alone. The State Department is not alone. The U.S. is not alone. As I said earlier, we join over 130 nations across the globe that are calling for an end to this electoral process.
Lisa Hamilton, Guyana Chronicle, did you want to speak? Given the fact that GCOM has not yet made a declaration, which is the basis on which a new president is elected and subsequently sworn in, how does the U.S. government justify requesting that President Granger nonetheless, quote, step aside?
Once again, the recount, the initial election on March 2nd, as well as the recount, had substantial observation efforts. International, local, party agents, election officials. There, as I said in my opening remarks, there were 7 separate results for this election. The 2 that were credible were from the initial election and the recount. And the Secretary of State has mentioned that we recognize the legitimate and credible count of the national vote recount.
Davina Samaru from Evening News, did you want to say something?
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ambassador. I just wanted to know, I know you mentioned that the decision on the next steps of sanctions would be left to the higher level of the U.S. government, but what are likely to be the sanctions that can be followed from this visa restriction?
Sorry, I really can't comment on that, but you can look at other examples around the globe, but I really can't comment at this time.
Okay, and we're getting to the end of our questions that are in the chat space. Neil had another question, go ahead.
Yes, 2 actually. Ambassador, Mr. Pompeo spoke yesterday about dangers to the Western Hemisphere if the democratic process is not fulfilled in Guyana. What sort of dangers could he have had in mind at that time? And the President's office in a statement yesterday has asked people like you to wait until the conclusion of this process. Are you overstepping, Ambassador?
Thank you. Dangers to the hemisphere. Well, as you well know, the U.S. has partnered with Guyana for years on the security front, on the governance front, as well as on the prosperity front. So we look forward to working with Guyana in the future on a secure, stable, prosperous country as well as region. So there are implicit dangers in all of those areas that we would like to avoid. And we believe that we can do that best by working together as we have in the past. No, we do not feel that we're getting ahead of anything here. As I've now said several times, the Secretary of State has spoken out for several weeks about the potential for serious consequences should Guyana or should individuals in Guyana continue to undermine the democratic process. At the highest levels of the State Department, it was determined that individuals have undermined that democratic process, and so he spoke. He stands by his word.
Okay, Adam Harris has another question. GCOM acknowledged that there were tainted votes which were counted. Did the U.S. take into consideration that there were fraudulent votes included in the recount figures?
The national vote recount considered all of that, and they had the CARICOM scrutineers there as well as the OAS observers. The CARICOM scrutineers were determined to be the most legitimate interlocutors for this process. And their words at the end were that they witnessed nothing that would prevent a declaration based on the national vote recount.
Ambassador.
Go ahead, Gordon.
Okay, Ambassador Gordon Mosley again. I'm just curious. I know you mentioned that the persons who would be facing these restrictions would find out if A, they try to apply for a visa in case they don't have one, and B, when they're traveling. For that to take place, especially for those traveling, someone at the airport would have to be informed that they're not allowed to board a flight to the US. So could you say if the embassy is in the process or will be in the process of informing those airlines that fly to the US that this list of persons will not be able to board a flight to the US?
No, again, privacy laws prohibit us from informing anyone about who's on this list. But individuals, normally when you book a flight, you are told that you need a visa for whatever country or not. And so it's up to the individual to research that him or herself.
But in the past, Ambassador, in the past, the US Embassy has informed airlines, particularly, that these persons are blacklisted from flying to the US. So is this a change in the way the US Embassy deals with such a case rather than the person find out at check-in?
No, that's incorrect, Gordon. We don't inform the airlines. It's a consular affairs action, and there is an exchange of letters, but there's no change in policy here. The individuals, if they have any questions, they are certainly welcome to call our consular affairs office.
Quickly, Ambassador, could you say whether the Guyana government has been formally notified of these visa restrictions?
The public was notified yesterday through the statement of the Secretary of State.
So there's no need for the US government to formally notify the Guyana government?
I can't comment on that.
Any other questions?
Yes, I quickly also want to know, suppose that the Chief Justice were to rule the other way outside of your expectations, what then will be the position of the international community, and in this specific case, the United States?
I'm not going to comment about the judicial process. That will have to play itself out.
Question from Ms. Fowler. Who should call the embassy at this time?
If people have questions, as I said, per privacy laws, U.S. privacy laws, we are not able to state names of individuals that have visa restrictions applied to them. But if somebody has a question, they're more than welcome to call our consular affairs office. And with that, I think I have one final comment to make, and then I'll wish you all a good day. Finally, I'll say that this turn of events is highly disappointing for the United States. The U.S. has cautioned for weeks and for months, frankly, that we stood by our word should democracy be undermined in Guyana. We continue to hope that the will of the Guyanese people will be respected and will prevail. This country, as you all know, has a very bright future, and we look very much to partnering with a democratically elected government in Guyana. I thank you all so very much again for doing this remotely. Hopefully someday we can do one of these again in person. Please stay safe, please stay healthy, and have a good day. Take care now.